the class of 2013 is Tony Kwiatkowski, and his title is How to Eat Dried Ferns, Bridging the Gap Between East and West in Conventional Medicine. Welcome, Tony.
Chinese medicine has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. My wonderful mother, born and raised in Hong Kong, introduced a funny-smelling slew of pills, herbs, roots, extracts, and ointments to the Kwiatkowski family. Since their initial appearance in our household, various types of traditional Chinese medicines have essentially become fixtures in our medicine cabinets, alongside your more conventional painkillers and antibiotics. All my life, I have faithfully consumed or applied whatever Chinese remedy my mother proposes to strengthen my body. All my life, I have also dutifully taken whatever prescription or treatment is prescribed by a doctor or suggested by my father to attack a sickness. All my life, I have been the beneficiary of a seamlessly integrated health regimen, but never have I questioned the integrity of the two philosophies in our household. In fact, I see the integrity of such a coexistence as such that it could greatly benefit the current American health culture in general. Traditional Chinese medicine, often referred to as TCM, along with other types of complementary and alternative medicines, has been growing exponentially in popularity in the United States since the 1990s. According to Martha L. Hare, Program Director at the Center to Reduce Cancer Health Disparities, what is now termed traditional Chinese medicine is a modern variant of acupuncture and herbal medicine that developed during the Maoist era. These herbal medicines and natural treatments are used with the intention of holistically treating the ailments of the body. In my argument, I will focus on the history and current perspectives of TCM, but I would like you to apply the information provided to the situation of complementary and alternative medicines as a whole in the United States. I ask this because TCM is simply a convenient and applicable microcosm of the introduction and development of complementary and alternative medicines in the West. In recent years, various treatments and products of TCM have become quite available, depending on the demographics in any particular area of the country. Although TCM has seen a notable increase in usage in the West, there is still a clear divide between those who stand behind the efficacy of Chinese medicine and those who consider it to be quackery. On the one hand, when considering the history and longevity of Chinese medicinal tradition, it is hard to claim that it is only faithfully practiced because of a blind following of tradition. Ted J. Kapchick, professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, asserts, Chinese medicine is a coherent and independent system of thought and practice that has been developed over 2 millennia. On the other hand, in the modern scientific world surrounding us, it can be just as hard to take a culture seriously if it bases its concepts of medicine on abstract philosophies. Edzard Ernst, first ever professor of complementary medicine in the world at the University of Exeter, explains the sentiment with his observation that what is not measurable tends to be denied existence. Chinese medicine has been consistently practiced and has held its ground in the deep and extensive tradition of its pure form for more than 2,000 years. There is a Chinese medical text called the Huangdi Neijing, which has largely remained the base of Chinese medicinal theory. In each modern text on Chinese medicine, one can clearly see and trace its common backbone with the original Neijing. However, keeping in mind its impressive faithfulness to the ancient philosophy upon which it is based, Chinese medicine is equally the result of countless revisions made during its lengthy existence. Ted Kapchick compares the revision and change in Chinese medicine to the exegetic process of reading scripture, saying that just as later authorities needed to explain theoretical issues raised by the Torah, so Chinese commentators added glosses on the Neijing that elucidated or even amended its seminal ideas. As historians and physicians encountered minor cultural differences between tribes or dynasties, they took the liberty to add or expand on base philosophies. Chinese medicinal philosophy's more marginal premises are organic in that they conform and improve based on societal change or the test of time. Chinese medicinal tradition, older than any Western conventional practices, has remained fundamentally unchanged, but possesses the adaptive quality necessary for maintaining a relative level of relevancy and potency for the uses of the consumer. The change in Chinese medicine associated with the passage of time is similar to the fluctuations in the Western biomedical and theological sphere. The specific treatment-based nature of biomedicine results in an always current and relevant medicinal landscape. The distinction is seen in the fact that biomedicine itself, according to Ted Kapchick, is primarily concerned with isolable disease categories, or agents of disease, whereas Chinese medicine attempts to deal with the equilibrium, the balancing of all the complementary aspects of the body to achieve health. This discrepancy results in basic cross-cultural difficulties for attempts at integration, and is, in essence, the discrepancy upon which I base my argument. The recent movement of the American health mindset toward preventative, healthy lifestyles is indicative of a need to obtain interpretable Chinese medicinal research results. Such a reevaluation of the research process would bridge the cultural gap and allow us to reap the benefits of a treatment philosophy so well suited for America's needs. The 20th century in America ushered in medical advances galore as Western medicine made leaps and bounds in treating disease. However, in the 50s and 60s, numerous studies raised heightened awareness for the importance of a wholesome diet and physical exercise in order to stay healthy. According to Dr. Jack W. Berryman, professor in the School of Medicine at the University of Washington, more and more research linked heightened fitness levels and increased physical activity with disease prevention, health maintenance, psychological well-being, and longevity. Since then, Americans have been looking at health with a more preventative mindset. Now allow me to emphasize the trajectory of the health focus here in the U.S. with the practical example of American health insurance. While we can all agree with the claims made by the health insurance companies concerning their dedication and commitment to, as Human.com puts it, helping people live well every day, I can't help but speculate they must have some ulterior motive. Let's be honest. Each one of these profit-based companies is run on numbers. Actuaries for each company find that their healthiest clients, the ones that yield the most profitable transactions, are those who look toward healthier lifestyles to sidestep sickness. As a result, web designers for each company incorporate strategically placed links to health tips, healthy living plans, and more into their sites. Insurance companies make money on healthy clients, and it has become apparent that preventative living keeps them healthy. Traditional Chinese medicine embodies the very same endeavors as the trend toward disease prevention in the form of the medicinal system. Western biomedicine, on the other hand, is highly effective in the area of immediate disease treatment. Ted Kaptchuk emphasizes that the Western physician starts with a symptom, then searches for the underlying mechanism, a precise cause for a specific disease. On the other hand, he says the Chinese physician directs his or her attention to the complete physiological and psychological individual. Most of the Western approach rests on the central idea of the body's expression of malady, the idea of each symptom being the result of a specific cause. This approach is essentially an ex post facto treatment of disease through reductionism, which is reducing a sickness to the molecular level and attacking disease agents with little heed to the rest of the body as a factor. Despite all the media surrounding us regarding healthy eating, exercise, and general lifestyle, the majority of Americans still seem to default to Western medicine, which presently dominates the mainstream medicinal realm. Western medicine is a viable and tested option for treating disease, but the monopoly that it holds in America is depriving the average American of the benefits of traditional Chinese medicine. In my correspondence with Dr. Gerald Chan, who serves on numerous biotechnology boards and completed his postdoctorate at the Harvard Medical School, he emphasized that Western science is built on reductionism. However, the problem with the Western approach lies in the fact that the body does not abide by the rules of reductionism. Rather, in the words of Dr. Chan, a person is a biologic organism with complex and overlapping signal transduction pathways. Dr. Mary Liu, author of the book East-West Healing, Integrating Chinese and Western Medicine for Optimal Health, puts it simply, despite the many marvels that Western medicine can offer, it clearly lacks an essential element that can help us lead healthier lives and cope better with illnesses at home. Western medicine's reductionist foundation is what allows it to work marvels in emergency situations. The nature of TCM, on the other hand, is such that it is applied based on both the existence of the countless interactions within the human body and on the prevention of sickness itself. According to Michael H. Kotow, journalist for the Journal of Medical Ethics at the University of Chile, being sick is a demonstration of one's incompetence in some aspect of one's way of life. This is where TCM can truly meet the needs of a preventative American health regime and provide a supplemental medicinal prevention system. Patrick Guinan, associate professor at the University of Illinois College of Medicine, puts it well with his idealistic hope that the goal of medicine is promoting the health of the patient. This promotion of health is best seen in the sphere of TCM and other complementary and alternative medicines. The simplistic solution to this imbalance of Western biomedicine and traditional Chinese medicine will be to popularize TCM in some manner so that the average American can be fully aware of its benefits and apply it in daily life. However, this ideal is undone at the first premise. Any attempts at the popularization of TCM have essentially been ineffective due to mainstream physicians' general distrust of all complementary and alternative medicine. According to Dr. Michael S. Goldstein, senior research scientist at the UCLA Center for Health Policy Research, conventional medicine's recognition of alternative forms of care has largely consisted of piecemeal utilization of particular therapies. For example, my physical therapist utilizes acupuncture as a regular treatment option for his patients, but has not embraced a spectrum of TCM modes of physical therapy. This limited view of TCM still fails to account for the vast majority of Chinese medicine's potential benefits. The acceptance of TCM as a trusted medicinal philosophy still hangs in the balance. The question separating TCM from the general consuming public is, do these treatments, as parts of an ideological whole, actually work? Goldstein says that increasingly, mainstream physicians' answer is, we don't know, but maybe, and we'd like to know more. The fundamental reason for even having to entertain such a doubtful question for the average American is the gap between the respective health systems as applied to medicinal practices. Discrepancies in practice correlate with discrepancies in research. Because of the differences in foundational tenets of each medicinal culture, Dr. Emily Wong says that Western medicine will face challenges in seeking innovative models for studying Chinese medicine. Dr. Wong, associate professor at the Department of Medicine at the University of Washington, goes on to explain that research on Chinese medicinal modalities does not fall easily into evidence-based medicine paradigm, with its strong reliance on randomized controlled trials. The continuous stream of research results from studies in TCM is creating a semi-hostile environment toward Chinese medicine in the West. The results are either inconclusive, being based on the Western method of randomized controlled trial, or are the subjective, personal research results, which are more traditionally organic to the age-old system. The effects of this issue on the common attitude toward TCM in the Western medicinal sphere are stated in an article in the 2011 Drug Discoveries and Therapeutics Journal. Some professionals are skeptical and critical of TCM because they think it is based on inaccurate interpretations and experientialism rather than scientific evidence. The medicine that has survived far more generations than any biomedicine has fallen victim to the judgment and skepticism of the West, simply because the West cannot scientifically validate research results in their current form. The main question to ask in my argument is, how do we, as potential American beneficiaries of an integrated medicinal system, address and reevaluate the central problem in TCM research? Tom Harkin, current U.S. Senator from Iowa and one of the most influential politicians involved in the formation of the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, holds a view which I share. He asserted that we must find an approach in which the unbendable rules of randomized controlled trials and the uncertainty of anecdotal case studies are laid aside in favor of a third approach, one that will quantify the effectiveness of treatments without reducing them to a series of chemical reactions and physiological processes. The act of reducing traditional Chinese medicines to the same level of isolation as biomedicine is intrinsically backward and destructive to the efficacy of any TCM treatments. A work by the National Academic Press puts it this way: although it may be possible to enroll the patients in a study that restricts their treatments to one at a time, it is difficult, scientifically questionable, and possibly even unethical to restrict for study purposes treatments that would naturally accompany the specific therapy or modality being studied. Reductionism, which currently is ingrained in the very nature of randomized controlled trials, should not have a place in the research of traditional Chinese medicines. In order to gain truly interpretable and applicable results from clinical trials on TCM, we must apply it as it is meant to be applied. However, instead of resorting to collecting experiential data from general patient well-being, we should apply more rigorously the practice of sample stratification. Dr. Gerald Chan stressed the point that for a molecular assay, or the biomedical molecular test commonly used to detect any disease in its isolated form, the reductionist nature of biomedicine is very effective. The crux of the matter, however, is that the body is not on the level of reductionism that molecular assays are. The condition of the body is not simply expressed in isolated symptoms. The human body is far more intricate, and as Dr. Chidi Ogwamna of the Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia puts it, the health transcends the absence of disease or infirmity. Decidedly, the success and efficacy of TCM is owed to the fact that, according to Dr. Chan, TCM remedies work on the organismic level whose efficacy will not be picked up by single molecular assays. In other words, since TCM treatments are aimed at normalizing the body as a whole, its full effects on a patient will not be detected by the standard practice of an isolated molecular test. Because the effects of TCM remedies on the body are influenced by characteristics of the entire person, in TCM, as stated in the National Academic Press CAM analysis, there is no such thing as a standard treatment or dose. Individualization of therapy to a unique combination of patient characteristics is a core concept of the modality. The varied collection of personal characteristics and lifestyles contained in a sample group poses a problem to clinical trial. In this light, standard molecular assays become essentially useless in quantifying the efficacy of a TCM remedy. The effective use of stratification in clinical trials for TCM would take into account many of the extraneous variables that skew the results of randomized controlled trials. Stratification, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is the division of a population into distinct groups, from each of which a proportion of an overall sample may be taken. A useful application of stratification in TCM testing would account for the individual characteristics and objective distinguishing factors of each patient's body, lifestyle, and genetics. In my correspondence with Dr. Chan, he quite aptly stated that TCM is the ultimate of personalized medicine. This statement is so real and so imminent that it would be a crime not to begin to stratify TCM research sample groups in order to open up Chinese medicines to the trust of the West. At this time, I would like to acknowledge the challenge posed by the unquantifiable bodily interactions contained in the philosophy of Chinese medicine. How exactly can the typical American consumer reconcile the fact that ideas like qi and the yin and yang are largely metaphysical concepts? Regardless of the Western patient's standing on TCM's efficacy, the TCM practitioner's use of immeasurable foreign terms and ideologies will often be the source of unease for the patient. However, says Dr. Peng Zhang of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, it should be admitted that some nomenclatures and conceptions in TCM are very difficult to be understood by Westerners just because of a lack of morphological evidence. In other words, these foreign concepts are difficult to grasp and embrace simply because of language and culture barriers, and should not detract from any Western application of TCM. Dr. Zhang goes on to say that seeking common ground while reserving differences is the guideline to deal with the relationship between TCM and Western medicine. In entertaining the specifics of East-West medicinal integration, looking past the limitations of cultural belief and embracing medicinal efficacy is essential to the acceptance of two medicines in harmony. Dr. Caroline A. Smith, director of the Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine at the University of Western Sydney, provides a practical application of such a harmony. Acupuncture involves the insertion of fine needles into different parts of the body to correct the imbalance of energy in the body. A westernized medical application of acupuncture involves the use of acupuncture using trigger points, segmental points, and commonly used formula points. Medical acupuncture may involve the application of acupuncture based on the principles of neurophysiology and anatomy, rather than TCM principles and philosophy. Acupuncture in recent years has achieved a level of acceptance far beyond any other TCM practices in the West. Its success, in my opinion, can be attributed to the spread of its application in Western physiological terms. For example, 2 years ago, I visited my aforementioned physical therapist to treat my back pain from a football injury. Among other manipulative conventional practices, he also treated me with electroacupuncture, a form of acupuncture in which a slight electric current is passed through two acupuncture needles. Whereas a TCM practitioner would have explained to me that the needles, placed in strategic points, correct imbalances in the flow of qi through the body, my physical therapist told me that the needles and current stimulate the release of natural painkillers in the body and increase blood flow in the area for healing. These are terms that a Westerner can understand. Traditional Chinese medicine does not have to be limited to traditional interpretation. The simple translation of its effects into Western terms renders TCM practices both approachable and non-invasive. Traditional Chinese medicine, fully respected in most non-Western nations, practiced for longer than any other medicinal system. The embodiment of time testing is a system under the judgment of the American biomedicinal giant. However, since this is the case, simply because of a lack of effective research, the situation is not hard to mend. It is no longer a matter of introducing completely foreign Chinese medicines to Americans, as it was in, say, the 1960s, but a matter of naturalizing them. It is no longer a matter of the initial breach into a society dominated by Western biomedicine, but a matter of placing the TCM system into the mainstream practices of that society. The strategic reimagination of TCM research to allow it to become an integral part of Western conventional medicine would place alternative medicines in a position to further bolster the preventative healthcare movement in the United States. I firmly believe that my experience in the integrative use of Western and Chinese medicine is one that could be shared by many consumers of conventional therapies today. The closed-minded tendencies of Western biomedicine need to be left behind in the dust of progress in favor of an inclusive medicine that is ideal for the American health. This is the medicine that could not be better tailored for our health and happiness. And if you're still skeptical of the results of a mingling of two cultures, take it from me. It works out just fine.
All right, walk us through a little bit of the lack of regulation that TCM has with the FDA, how that would be kind of put into place for the merge these two.
Right, so right now the FDA does not trust results that are coming from the studies being done at TCM. And so if we were to better the methods used in the research process, then we would be yielding better results from these studies. In turn, the FDA will be able to accept the results, and they would eventually be more willing to legitimize the therapies that are being used.
So in your research, did you come across Western medicine, evidence-based research groups, perhaps through the NIH, where we are looking at complementary medicine, some of traditional Chinese medicine and other forms of alternative medicine, perhaps cancer research?
Of course, there's plenty of research being done on TCM. However, what I'm dealing with is the methods that we're using to research TCM. I would say that applying Western thought and the Western method of testing medicine is not a viable way to test Chinese medicine.
That's right, you had a great description of kind of how maybe that is the introduction for sort of the opening the eyes for those who come from a Western mindset. What about from the traditional Chinese medicine groups through the millennium? What have been the ways that there have been studied and conventional therapy there have been changes throughout time? How has that process happened?
Oh, well, obviously, because TCM is really a foundational philosophy in China. Are you saying about in China?
Yes.
For example?
Yes.
Okay, so because it is part of tradition in China, there really isn't as much of a need for structured regulation and change as there is in the West. And so, for example, like you were saying, the changes that were made, acupuncture originally only had 365 points in the body, different trigger points. But now the number is somewhere over 2,000. So that's just an example of how Chinese medicine has evolved.
So when you go to an acupuncture, they have the diagram that there are Chinese characters associated. Is there a concern with like the whole loss and translation part of that? Because there are Chinese characters that they're not translated to English, and how do you take that into account?
Exactly. So that's a good question. In research in Chinese medicine, the more research we do in Chinese medicine, I believe that either paralleling concepts in Western medicine will be found that can explain those concepts, or even things we discover that either legitimize the actual concepts in Chinese medicine themselves. So the more Chinese medicine progresses in the conventional sphere in the West, the more we will be able to interpret what Chinese medicine practitioners are trying to say.
So the text that you talked about that has been handed down from the generation forever in China, that is meant to be able to
in the West, in say a Western medical school, I believe that it could be. There are translations, however, I don't think they fully do the text justice. But obviously that's just in the case of Chinese medicine as it is now in the West. That's the problem I'm trying to address. Because it's not in the mainstream practices, it's not as applicable to Western thought as it would be later.
Should that be approach bringing somebody from that philosophy over to say medical school here in Texas? When you started on Austin, is it something that they could incorporate into their curriculum?
I'm not sure I understand.
So to complement the two, so they're teaching the Western medicine, is that something they could complementary teach the Eastern medicine? Do they offer a course?
Eventually, I think, yes, they could very easily offer a course because of the research that I want to be done in Chinese medicine.
When it comes to insurance, how much is this covered?
Currently, really only acupuncture is covered in insurance. Insurance companies are beginning to cover acupuncture because of acupuncture's success in the West.
So do you think that it ties into where? Sorry.
Technically, I can't imagine med schools doing anything unless it's covered by insurance.
Exactly.
So how can, are there TCM lobbyists out there that can help? Seriously, that can help this cause happen? Because it makes sense holistically to treat an individual. And I would imagine doctors would appreciate that because diseases usually aren't back. So is there any movement out there to advocate on your behalf?
There is. So a common question would be why aren't, if insurance companies are so concerned about the health of the patient and they realize that a preventative lifestyle is what keeps them healthy, why aren't they jumping on board with the whole TCM? Part of that is because the FDA won't regulate Chinese medicines as they are now. And so better methods in the study of TCM, I think, would bring about more awareness for the efficacy of TCM in both academia and in even the private sector, people who want to invest in medicine. And so that would really increase the level of acceptance and I guess trust for TCM in the West. And then insurance companies, I believe, would be able to.
Okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so, when we're speaking to, sort of our culture as a whole, when we're thinking about health, preventative health, but also disease treatment, really looking to that. Patients and people are concerned about, effectiveness and safety. How would you approach the patient or the person that you're convincing to consider TCM?
Currently, a lot of Westerners they turn to TCM because they want to escape all the bad things in Western medicine, like side effects and stuff like that. And so often they'll go to a practitioner. You would want to go to a practitioner because they've been doing this. Most ideally an accredited practitioner because there are accreditations for people who practice Chinese medicine. And so they know what they're doing. They know what therapies they're giving to Westerners. They know that they're in the West and that people have concerns about side effects. And so they would be able to guide you in the application of TCM.
Is there better agency than the
There is. There is. But what I'm saying is there are accreditation services for people that practice TCM, but it's still not in the mainstream practices of the West.
Okay, so one question from the audience is, why do we need to fully integrate rather than just raise awareness and let people choose their own path for medicine?
Because if we fully integrate, right now that's what it is. People can choose whether or not they want to use Western medicine or Chinese medicine. But because all of the Western medicinal sphere is geared toward only Western medicine, and because the structure in the Western medicinal sphere is geared toward making money off Western medicine and promoting Western medicine, and that is ingrained in the Western culture, people default to Western medicine. And so I believe that fully integrating would really provide the holistic medicinal structure that America needs because of the movement toward preventative lifestyle.
So in what ways is that kind of are there certain areas of medicine that seems to be more successful, where maybe having an integrative approach it would be more helpful for a physician to have an integrative approach to one illness or another?
Yes, because you mean to a specific, I don't know.
Yeah, so are there certain areas of medicine where maybe this is more effective or could be more effective with an integrative approach?
Yes, for example, diabetes, heart disease, things like that. People get diabetes and then they go treat it with a bunch of medications that each have their own list of side effects. So I believe in the West, if we were to integrate with Chinese medicine, there would be less cases of diabetes. People prone to disease, prone to specific diseases, if they have a medicinal philosophy that is in step with the lifestyle that they're trying to carry out, then I believe we'll be able to sidestep sickness more rather than wait for it to happen and then treat.
Were there any TCM therapies approved by the FDA then?
Acupuncture.
But now,
In
herbal remedies.
1996, acupuncture was moved from a class 3 to a class 2 medical device. And so people who are trained in the application of acupuncture can identify them.
But no herbal remedies or cocktails?
Not that I know. Okay.
Are you, in your research, did you read about other, maybe not in Chinese medicine, but other medicines that were alternative medicines that have become Western medicines, perhaps digitalis?
It's not. I'm sorry.
Certain medicines have become plant-based.
Right, and that really brings up an important aspect of medicine. Is in the West, medicine is based on essentially theory. And so when different studies come up that prove something, or not prove, but are evidence for a certain theory or concept, then medicine really changes according to that. For example, Dr. Kuhn, he developed this theory of the paradigm shifts in medicine. Is that when there's a lot of basis for a theory, then all these medicines are in support of that theory and they treat this disease or that disease. But whenever there's a shift in the discovery of a certain disease or a theory, that's when they put all their efforts into all these other medicines. For example, the Human Genome Project changed all kinds of thought concerning human genetics. And so that's an example of the more we research TCM, the more we will find that the effects that TCM have on the human body are actually quantifiable if we interpret them as Western genetics.
Are there studies going on now that are incorporating TCM? Studies?
They are doing studies on TCM, but the methods that they're using to study TCM aren't effective. The majority of the methods used in TCM, in the study of TCM, aren't effective.
Okay, talk to us then about being a Christian who then uses Chinese medicine, how those two can be incorporated instead of separated.
Right, well, a lot of Westerners are turned off by the fact that there are a lot of spiritual concepts. There's a lot of spiritualist ideas associated with Chinese medicine. If you walk into a Chinese medicine practitioner's office, you'll see a Buddha or something, and they're like, oh, this is spiritualism. But first of all, there's always a lot of drag with religion and medicine. For example, even in the U.S., Christians pray for their doctors, pray for medicines to work. But they're not. The medicines aren't dependent on religion. In China, a country in which there are 50 to 60 million Christians, it wouldn't make any sense that those 50 to 60 million Christians either only half practice Chinese medicine or practice Chinese medicine and it doesn't work. My entire mom's side of the family is Christian. And not once in my entire life have I heard them mention any aspect of spiritualism that's involved with Chinese medicine or is commonly associated with Chinese medicine.
I have a hard time with why they can't get it to sort of fit into our research structure. I know there are nursing studies that have studied the effects that prayer has on patients feeling symptoms, and
Exactly, you just said they're not FDA approved. That's why, because the FDA doesn't trust the results of these studies. It's because the results being used, or the research methods being used aren't geared towards the kind of mindset and structure of the philosophy and form of medicine that's being tested.
But do you necessarily need the FDA approval because, I mean, it's been proven that prayer helps people heal and then, you know, touching someone, pulling their hand when they're in the hospital helps, so can we still continue these things regardless of FDA approval?
You can continue them, but they're not going to be incorporated into the mainstream culture.
So, I guess I'm putting in on that too, is, what are your very specific, you know, we talked about sort of as an individual practitioner, but now go broader, we're thinking your Western culture. What's your proposal for starting with, you know, you talked about the research, maybe tell us specifically how you direct that.
So I really think, sorry, go ahead. Okay, so I think it would have to be a three-tiered process. So say I were to get a $3 million grant to try to incorporate or try to get this whole thing moving. First off, I would address academia. I would get professors and students who are pressured yearly to come up with new ideas and kind of push the boundaries in medicine, and people that are really expected to find new things and be at the forefront of medicine. I would get them to begin to publish more, because to raise awareness for Chinese medicines. Because then public policy will get involved. Politicians, people that can affect legislation. For example, Tom Harkin, who is the senator, who was involved in the formation of NCCAM, which is a really big complementary and alternative medicine organization. They could push for the FDA to begin to regulate these things. And once the two tiers are in place, especially with the 38% of Americans today use one form or another of complementary and alternative medicine. Once these three tiers are in place, then the private sector will come in. They'll see that there's actual money to be made in Chinese medicines, and they'll begin to see that there are profits in Chinese medicine. People are moving in that direction, and they'll begin to put their money into more research.
Your first point you mentioned, that the method to looking for new modalities, are you proposing
New methods of research.
new methods of research, not new
No.
modalities of,
So if I were to walk into a Chinese medicinal clinic and I had complaints, or my Western medical doctor said I had some kind of liver dysfunction, walk me through what it would look like when I go to a Chinese doctor. What would he do to me that would be totally different?
Right, so this is the big difference between Western medicine and Chinese medicine. Western medicine, often you'll go in with symptoms. You'll tell the practitioner the symptoms, and they'll sit there with their little notepad, right? Oh yeah, very interesting. Right, prescription, illegible handwriting. In the Chinese medicinal system, however, you go in, and it would be a very hands-on experience. For example, my dad went in to get treated for a certain sickness, and they looked at his tongue and felt his pulse. So there's a lot of different interpretations and explanations that Chinese medicine has for different diseases and such, which I believe through better methods of research can be translated into Western answers that are in